This is Max and Mia podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Max and Mia podcast. I'm Max.
And I'm Mia. So glad you're here with us today. Whether this is your very first episode or you have been riding with us since day one, we are genuinely thrilled to have you.
And hey, if you're getting something out of what we put together, do us a solid and hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and share this with anyone who is serious about taking their English to the next level.
That honestly means everything to us. Okay, so today's episode, we need to talk about it because this one will take your English to the next level, and we think you're going to love it.
So, here's the deal. Today we're going all in for our C1 listeners. We're talking about authentic, real-world conversations. The kind you would actually hear at a coffee shop, in the middle of a work meeting, or just hanging out with friends on a Friday night.
And before any of you intermediate learners think about bouncing, do not go anywhere. This episode is absolutely for you too. Think of it as a challenge, a push outside your comfort zone. Because that's exactly how you grow.
That's right. We're not dumbing anything down, and we're not sticking to the safe textbook phrases you already know by heart. Instead, you're going to hear idioms, collocations, and the kind of natural language patterns that native speakers use without even thinking twice.
So here is your challenge for today. Stay locked in. Pay close attention to the nuances, and by the time this episode wraps up, you'll have picked up a ton of practical, real-world English you can start using right away.
Whether you are at C1 or working your way up, this is your moment. Let's get into it.
Let's go.
All right, so let's get into it. The topic for today's first conversation is one that, honestly, makes people uncomfortable. And I think that discomfort is exactly why we need to talk about it.
Yeah, and before we even get into the conversation you are about to hear, we want to set the table a little bit. Give you some context, some vocabulary, and a framework for thinking about this.
So the concept is meritocracy. And on the surface, it sounds great, right? The idea that if you work hard, if you put in the effort, if you develop your skills, success will follow. You earn what you get, and you get what you earn.
Which is something most of us were raised to believe. Like, that's practically baked into the culture. You hear it everywhere. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can be anything you want to be. Work hard, and the rest will take care of itself.
Right. And there's something genuinely motivating about that worldview. It puts agency in your hands. It tells you that your outcomes aren't fixed, that your effort actually matters. And to be fair, for a lot of people, that has been true.
But here is where it gets complicated. And this is the core of today's debate. A growing number of researchers, economists, and sociologists are pushing back on that narrative. They are arguing that meritocracy as a system is less of a reality and more of a myth, a really convenient one.
The argument goes something like this. The zip code you are born into, the school district you grow up in, the social capital your family has, the networks your parents can open doors with. These things are not minor variables. They're massive. Some would say they're the deciding factor.
And when we talk about social capital, we mean the connections, the relationships, the access to informal opportunities that people accumulate over time. It's the kind of thing that is invisible if you have it, and absolutely glaring if you don't.
There's also this idea of structural inequality. meaning the barriers and advantages that exist in systems, schools, workplaces, financial institutions that are not about any individual's effort or lack of effort. They were there before you showed up, and they'll be there after you leave.
And on the other side of this debate, you have people who are not dismissing hardship, but who genuinely believe that individual agency, that is your ability to make choices and drive your own outcomes, is being undervalued in this conversation. That when we overemphasize systemic barriers, we risk sliding into a kind of learned helplessness.
Which is a real tension, because both things can be true at the same time. Systemic barriers can be real and devastating, and individual effort can still matter. The question is about proportion, about how much weight each side of that equation actually carries.
And that's exactly what makes this such a charged conversation, because it's not just an academic debate, it's personal. Where you land on this issue often says a lot about your own story, your own experience, and honestly, what you need to believe in order to keep going.
So before you hear the conversation, we want you to sit with a few questions. And these are not your typical warm-up questions. We are going to push a little.
First one. Think about the most successful person you know personally. Not a celebrity, not someone you follow online, someone in your actual life. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of their success is something they built, and how much of it was already there waiting for them when they arrived?
Second, have you ever worked incredibly hard at something and still not gotten the outcome you deserved? If the answer is yes, what story did you tell yourself about why? Did you blame yourself first, or did you allow yourself to look at the bigger picture?
And the third one is maybe the most uncomfortable. If meritocracy is partly a myth, why do so many people, including people who have been disadvantaged by the system, still defend it so fiercely? What does that tell us about the stories we need in order to function?
No easy answers, but that is kind of the point. Sit with those questions, let them rattle around a little, and then listen closely to what is coming next.
Now, we're going to listen to two people having this debate. Pay attention to the expressions they use, how they express themselves, and how natural they sound. Let's take a listen.
I'm just saying, my dad came here with nothing, like genuinely nothing, and he built something. So when people tell me the system is rigged, I hear that, but I also think, okay, but people do make it work.
No, I hear you, and I'm not saying effort means nothing. But I think there's a difference between your dad being exceptional and the system being fair. Like, those are two completely different arguments.
Maybe, but if the system was as broken as people say, wouldn't more people just give up? There are plenty of people from tough situations who do get ahead.
Sure, and we love those stories. We turn them into movies. But think about how many people we don't hear from. For every person who makes it out, there are probably 10 who worked just as hard and didn't. We just don't talk about them.
Okay, but isn't that kind of true for everything? Not everyone who starts a business makes it either. That doesn't mean entrepreneurship is a myth.
That's actually not the same thing, because when a business fails, it's usually about the market, the timing, bad luck. But when a kid from a low-income neighborhood doesn't get the same education as a kid from a wealthy suburb, that's not bad luck. That's built into the structure.
Right, but you can't just write off personal responsibility entirely. I've seen people from really hard backgrounds who pushed through and made something of themselves. And I've seen people with every advantage imaginable completely squander it.
Nobody is writing off personal responsibility. What I'm saying is that personal responsibility has limits when the resources aren't there. Like, you can be the most disciplined person in the room, but if you can't afford college, if your neighborhood school is underfunded, if you don't know anyone who can get you in the door somewhere, effort alone doesn't close that gap.
But that's where I push back, because the narrative of the odds are stacked against you can become its own trap. At some point, it starts to feel like an excuse. Like if you tell someone long enough that the system will never let them win, they might just stop trying altogether.
Okay, that's actually a fair point. There is something to that. But I think you're mixing up two things. Acknowledging reality is not the same as surrendering to it. I can tell you the game is harder for some people without telling you to give up.
I guess. I just worry that we spend so much time talking about the barriers that we forget to talk about the tools. Like, what can someone actually do with what they have? That conversation feels way more useful to me.
And that's where we might actually agree. Because yes, agency matters. Yes, the tools matter. But you can't hand someone a toolbox and pretend the building is on fire. Both things need attention at the same time.
Okay, I can work with that.
Look, I'm not saying the system is hopeless. I'm saying it's not neutral. And once you sit with that, the conversation gets a lot more honest.
Fair enough. I think we've been talking past each other a little.
Probably, but that's kind of the point, isn't it? This stuff is genuinely complicated.
Okay, wow. That one moved fast, didn't it? Like, I genuinely didn't know where they were going to land by the end of that.
Same. And I think what made it work is that neither of them was being unreasonable. Nate was not saying poverty does not exist, and Camilla was not saying effort is pointless. They were actually listening to each other, which, let's be honest, doesn't always happen in these kinds of conversations.
Right. And I thought the most interesting moment was when Nate said that the narrative of the odds being stacked against you can become its own trap. Because that is not a dismissal. That is actually a real psychological argument. There's research on this. When people are repeatedly told they cannot win, it can affect their motivation over time.
Absolutely. And Camilla did not just shut that down. She acknowledged it. She said, fair point, but then she drew a line between acknowledging reality and surrendering to it. And that distinction, I think, is the most honest thing either of them said.
For me personally, I land somewhere in the middle, but I lean toward Camilla's side on this one, because I do think we have a tendency to celebrate the exceptions and kind of quietly ignore the rule. Like, we hold up the one person who made it out and say, see, it's possible. And it is, but possible and probable are very different things.
That is so well put. Possible and probable. Yeah, I think I lean that way too. Not because I want to take anything away from people who have worked hard and built something, but because I think pretending the playing field is level when it clearly is not does more harm than good in the long run.
All right, let's talk about the language for a second, because there was a lot of good stuff in there.
Oh, so much. Okay, let's start with write off. Nate said you can't just write off personal responsibility. To write something off means to completely dismiss it, to decide it has no value and stop considering it. You hear this a lot in financial contexts too, like writing off a debt. But in conversation, it works exactly the way Nate used it.
Then there was squander it. He said some people with every advantage imaginable completely squander it. To squander something means to waste it in a really careless way. Not just to lose it, but to have had it and throw it away through bad choices or zero effort. It carries a little bit of judgment in it.
Right, it is not a neutral word. And then push through. He said people from hard backgrounds who pushed through. That phrasal verb means to keep going despite difficulty, to get to the other side of something hard without giving up. It shows resilience but also effort.
And then my favorite. From the whole conversation, Camilla's line near the end. You can't hand someone a toolbox and pretend the building is on fire. That is not an established idiom. She constructed that image on the spot, and it works perfectly. It means you can give someone resources or skills, but if the environment around them is collapsing, the tools alone are not enough. The image is vivid, and the logic is airtight.
That line genuinely stopped me. It's the kind of thing you want to write down. And it also shows you how native speakers build meaning. You don't always need a prepackaged phrase. Sometimes you just reach for the clearest image you can find, and it lands.
And lastly, talking past each other. Nate used that at the very end. When two people are talking past each other, they're both speaking but not really connecting. Each person is responding to what they think the other one means, not what they're actually saying. It is a really common dynamic in debates and honestly in everyday life too.
Super useful phrase. Okay, so that was a lot. And we are not done yet because we have got one more conversation coming your way today. And honestly, this topic might be even more charged than the last one.
Yeah, this one feels personal to a lot of people. And it should. Because it is about something that happens constantly in films, in music, in travel content, in the way media tells certain stories, and most people have never really put a name to it.
The topic is the romanticization of poverty. Specifically, the way popular culture and mainstream media have a long history of romanticizing life in low-income communities, in so-called rough neighborhoods, or in what gets lumped together and labeled as the developing world. And the way that romanticization often ends up painting people as simple, resilient, and somehow more authentic precisely because they have less.
There's this idea that keeps showing up in movies, in documentaries, in Instagram travel accounts, in songs. Poor but happy. Like, they don't have much, but they have community. They have spirit. They have joy that we, the audience, have lost somewhere along the way.
And on the surface, that sounds almost like a compliment, like, oh, how beautiful, how real. But when you sit with it a little longer, it starts to reveal something uncomfortable, because what it is actually doing is using someone else's hardship as a backdrop for your own emotional experience. It turns real people with real struggles into a kind of aesthetic.
And that is what romanticization means in this context. It does not mean anything inappropriate. It means taking something complex, something painful, something deeply human, and flattening it into an object, something you consume, something that makes you feel a certain way without requiring you to actually engage with what is behind it.
There is also a flip side to this conversation, and it is worth naming. Some people push back and say, hold on, is it really wrong to find beauty in simplicity? Is appreciating a community's resilience the same as mocking their poverty? Where is the line between genuine admiration and projection?
And that tension is real. Because intention matters, right? But so does impact. And sometimes those two things do not line up the way we think they do.
Okay, before we roll the audio, here are your questions. And again, we are not looking for easy answers here.
First one, think about a movie, a song, a travel post, or a documentary that made poverty look beautiful or even desirable? What was it about that content that felt off? Or did it feel off at all? And if it did not, why do you think that is?
Second, have you ever caught yourself, even for a second, thinking that people with less must somehow be freer, more connected, less stressed? Where does that thought come from? And what does it say about the way you see your own life?
And the third one, who gets to tell stories about poverty? Does it matter whether the person telling the story has lived it? And when someone who has not lived it tells that story beautifully, is that art or is that something else?
Really sit with those. Because the conversation you are about to hear is going to go right into the middle of all of them. Let's listen.
Okay, so I want to get your take on something. I was watching this documentary last week about a community in rural Guatemala, and it was stunning. Like, visually, emotionally, but halfway through, I caught myself thinking, wait, is this actually about them, or is this about how the filmmaker wants me to feel?
Oh, I know exactly that feeling. And I think the fact that you caught yourself is actually kind of rare. Most people just take it in. They leave thinking, wow, those people are so strong, so joyful, they have nothing, and yet...
Right, and yet. That phrase does a lot of heavy lifting, doesn't it?
It really does, because what it's implying is that their happiness is surprising, like we didn't expect it, which tells you everything about the assumptions that went into making the film in the first place.
Okay, but I want to push back a little here, because I think there's a version of this conversation that goes too far. Like, are we saying it is wrong to find beauty in a community that doesn't have much? Are we saying filmmakers should not document that at all?
No, I don't think it's about whether you document it. It's about what you choose to show and what you leave out. Like, if your entire portrait of a place is children laughing and colorful markets and this sense of timeless simplicity, you're glossing over everything that makes life actually hard there. The lack of healthcare, the infrastructure that doesn't exist, the people who are desperately trying to leave.
But then, isn't that just editing? Every documentary does that. You cannot show everything.
Sure, but editing is a choice, and when those choices consistently make poverty look picturesque, that's not neutral. That's a pattern, and that pattern has a name. People call it poverty exploitation.
Okay, that term. I have heard it, but it always feels a little harsh to me. Like, I think people sometimes use it to shut down any representation of struggling communities altogether.
I get that. And yeah, it can be overused, but the core idea is real. It describes content that puts suffering on display in a way that is designed to make the audience feel something without actually challenging them to do anything about it. It satisfies the emotion without demanding the action.
Okay, I see the distinction. It is not about showing hardship, it's about what you are asking the audience to do with it.
Exactly, and I think the romanticization thing is almost worse in some ways, because at least with poverty exploitation, there's an acknowledgement that something is wrong. But when you put a community on a pedestal and say, look how happy they are with so little, you're not even giving them the dignity of their own struggle. You're turning their circumstances into a backdrop for your inspiration.
That's a tough thing to sit with, because I think a lot of people, myself included, genuinely admire that kind of resilience, and we think that admiration is respectful.
And maybe it starts that way, but admiration can flip into projection really fast. At some point, you stop seeing the actual people and you start seeing the story you needed them to be.
So what's the alternative? Just do not engage with those communities at all?
No, the alternative is to dig deeper, to actually listen, to let the complexity be there instead of smoothing it out into something comfortable. Because real people aren't inspiration, they're just people.
That last part, I think that is where I needed to land. I just didn't know it until right now.
Okay, I need a second after that one. because Priya's last line just sat with me. Real people aren't inspiration. They're just people. Like, that is so simple and so devastating at the same time.
Right? And I think that is exactly the problem with romanticization. It doesn't feel malicious. It feels like appreciation. It feels like you're honoring someone. But what you're actually doing is turning them into a function. They exist in your story to make you feel something. And that's not respect. That is use.
And Marcus was interesting to me because he was not playing devil's advocate just to be difficult. He was genuinely wrestling with it. Like, he came in with a real question, which was, is admiration the same as exploitation? And I think by the end he had to admit that the line between the two is a lot thinner than he thought.
That moment where Priya said admiration can flip into projection really fast. That one hit differently. Because I think most of us have been on the Marcus side of that conversation at some point. We genuinely feel moved by something. We think that feeling is generous, and it does not occur to us to ask who it is actually serving.
Honestly, same. And I think that is what makes this topic so slippery. With meritocracy, you can at least point to data, to numbers, to studies. But this one is about gaze, about how you look at something and what that looking does. And that is much harder to pin down.
Which is probably why it does not get talked about enough. Okay, let's get into the language because this conversation had some really interesting stuff.
Yes. Starting with does a lot of heavy lifting. Marcus used that when he said, and yet does a lot of heavy lifting. When something does heavy lifting in a sentence or an argument, it means it is carrying a lot of meaning or doing a lot of work without being obvious about it. A small word, a single phrase, quietly holding up a whole assumption. You will hear this one a lot in analysis and commentary.
Then glossing over. Priya said you are glossing over everything that makes life hard there. To gloss over something means to move past it quickly and deliberately, to not give it the attention it deserves. It is not the same as ignoring something. Ignoring is more passive. Glossing over has intention behind it. You know it is there and you choose to smooth right past it.
Really useful distinction. Then put on a pedestal. Priya said when you put a community on a pedestal. To put someone or something on a pedestal means to idealize it so completely that you stop seeing it clearly. You lift it up so high that it loses its humanity, its complexity, its flaws. And the irony is that it looks like admiration, but it actually makes real understanding impossible.
And then flip into. She said admiration can flip into projection really fast. To flip into something means to transform into it suddenly, without much warning. It is different from gradually becoming something. A flip implies a switch. One moment it is this, the next moment it is that. And in this context, it is almost like a warning. Watch how fast one thing becomes another.
And lastly, dig deeper. Priya used it near the end. To dig deeper means to go beyond what is visible on the surface, to push past the comfortable version of something and look for what is actually underneath. It comes up a lot in journalism, in research, in any context where surface level is not enough.
And I think that phrase is actually the through line for both conversations today. Whether we are talking about meritocracy or about how we represent poverty, the problem is almost always that we stopped too early. We took the easy version and called it the truth.
That is a really good way to wrap it up. All right, that is everything we had for you today, and honestly, this was one of those episodes that is going to stick with us for a while.
Same. We hope it stuck with you too. And if it made you a little uncomfortable, good. That is usually a sign that something landed.
Before we go, if you got something out of today's episode, do us a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely makes a difference in terms of who gets to find this podcast.
And subscribe if you have not already. We put a lot into every episode, and we want to make sure you are there for the next one. We have got more topics like this coming, the kind that make you stop and actually think.
Drop us a comment too. Seriously, tell us where you landed on either of these debates. We read every single one, and we actually love hearing how different people react to the same conversation.
And if you know someone who is working on their English and wants content that treats them like an adult, send this their way. That is the biggest thing you can do for us.
All right, that is a wrap on this one. Thanks so much for being here.
Take care of yourselves. Keep challenging the easy version of things. And we will see you in the next episode.
See you, everyone. To keep taking your English to the next level, click on the next video or explore the others we've made for you.